You'll never be as good as your brother anyway, my father spat, his words echoing through his mahogany-paneled office. I stood there, gripping my business proposal so tightly the pages crumpled. 10 years of education, countless sleepless nights preparing for this moment, and he dismissed me with a single cruel sentence. My brother Jacob slouched in the corner armchair, awkwardly fiddling with his phone, pretending not to hear our father tear my dreams apart. My name is Madeline Brown, and I spent 30 years believing I was destined to help lead my father's company, Brown Technologies. I grew up breathing the business. Dinner conversations revolved around market strategies, and my weekends were spent shadowing department heads instead of playing with friends. Unlike Jacob, who'd rather be anywhere else, I lived and breathed the industry. I'd done everything right. Top of my class at business school, internships at leading tech firms, even learned Mandarin to help with our Asian market expansion. But standing in my father's office that day, none of it mattered. The only thing he saw when he looked at me was his daughter, someone to be married off, not trusted with his legacy. Dad, just look at my proposal, I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. The market analysis shows. Enough! He cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. I've already decided. Jacob will take over as COO next month. You should focus on finding a good husband. That's what your mother and I want for you. I glanced at my brother, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. Jacob was 27, had barely passed his business classes, and spent more time on his golf swing than in the office. But he had the one qualification that mattered to my father. He was the son. The familiar ache of being overlooked burned in my chest, but this time something was different. Maybe it was the way my father smirked when he mentioned finding a husband, or how he didn't even bother looking at the proposal I'd spent months perfecting. A strange calm settled over me as I realized that no matter what I achieved, nothing would ever be enough for him. You're right, I said quietly, smoothing the crumpled pages of my proposal. My father looked up, surprised by my sudden agreement. I should focus on my future. I placed the document on his desk, turned around, and walked out of his office. Behind me, I heard him chuckle, probably thinking he'd finally gotten through to me. He had no idea that I wasn't surrendering. I was declaring war. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by industry reports and market analyses I'd gathered over the years. Everything I knew about Brown Technologies was spread across my dining room table: supplier contracts, distribution networks, customer pain points. Information that most people would kill to have, handed to me simply because no one thought I'd ever use it against them. Taking an interest in the family business is fine for a hobby, my father had always said with that condescending smile. It's cute that you want to learn. Each dismissive comment had only driven me to study harder, dig deeper. Now all that knowledge felt like ammunition. My phone buzzed. Another message from my mother. Your father means well, she wrote. He just wants to protect you from the stress. I turned off my phone without replying. My mother had always tried to play peacemaker, smoothing over my father's harsh words with gentle excuses. But she'd never once stood up to him, never challenged his outdated views. The next morning, I walked into Brown Technologies for what I knew would be the last time. As I packed up my desk in the marketing department, my colleagues avoided eye contact. News traveled fast in family companies. Everyone knew about yesterday's meeting, about how Walter Brown's ambitious daughter had finally been put in her place. I'm sorry, Maddie, Lisa from accounting whispered as she passed by. We all know you deserved that position. Her sympathy made it worse somehow. How many others had watched me work twice as hard as Jacob, only to be pushed aside because I was born the wrong gender? I was nearly finished packing when my brother appeared in my doorway. Hey, he said, shifting uncomfortably. Dad says you're taking some time off to think about your priorities. That's one way to put it, I replied, closing my laptop bag with more force than necessary. Look, I know you're upset, but maybe it's for the best. Running a company is really stressful and... Save it, Jacob, I cut him off. We both know you don't want this job, but you'll take it because it's easier than standing up to him. My brother flinched at the truth in my words. As I walked out of the building, carrying my small box of belongings, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked different somehow. Lighter, as if putting down the weight of my father's approval had physically transformed me. One thought kept running through my mind. They had no idea what I was capable of. The decision to leave the country came surprisingly easily. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my place in my father's world. Now it was time to build my own. Within weeks, I'd liquidated my trust fund, the one thing my father couldn't control, signed a lease for an office space in Singapore, and booked a one-way flight. My mother's reaction was predictably dramatic. "How can you abandon your family like this?" she sobbed over the phone. "Your father will never forgive you." I almost laughed at that. Forgiveness implied I'd done something wrong, and for the first time in my life, I was absolutely certain I hadn't. The real surprise came from my grandmother, my father's mother. She showed up at my apartment the night before I left, her small frame radiating determination. "Your grandfather would have been ashamed," she said, "but not in the way I expected. Ashamed of what your father has become. The company was built on innovation, not tradition." She pressed a thick envelope into my hands. Inside was everything I needed to know about my grandfather's original vision for Brown Technologies, including his personal journals and early business plans. "He always said the future belongs to those brave enough to create it," my grandmother told me. "Show them what that means." The first months in Singapore were a blur of meetings, coding sessions, and sleepless nights. I'd identified the biggest weakness in my father's business model, their outdated approach to supply chain management. While Brown Technologies relied on traditional relationships and manual processes, I was building something revolutionary, an AI-driven platform that could predict market demands and optimize inventory in real time. My team grew quickly. I hired the brightest minds I could find, people who saw the potential in disrupting an industry stuck in the past. We worked out of a cramped office with questionable air conditioning, but the energy was electric. Every day brought us closer to launching something that would change everything. The first major breakthrough came 6 months in. Our prototype caught the attention of a prominent tech investor, who immediately saw the potential. "This could revolutionize the entire industry," she said during our pitch meeting. "How soon can you scale?" With proper funding secured, we moved fast. Every weakness I'd observed in my father's company became an opportunity for innovation. Where Brown Technologies took weeks to process orders, our system could do it in minutes. Their manual quality control became our automated perfection. Their rigid hierarchy transformed into our fluid collaboration. I never mentioned my connection to Brown Technologies. As far as the world was concerned, I was just another tech entrepreneur with a vision. But late at night, when I reviewed our growing market share reports, I allowed myself a small smile. Somewhere in his mahogany office, my father was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating his daughter. 18 months after my departure, my company, Novatech Solutions, had become the talk of the industry. Our platform was revolutionizing how businesses handled their supply chains, and companies were scrambling to integrate our technology. Every success felt like a personal victory, especially when I read reports about Brown Technologies struggling to keep up with the mysterious new player in the market. I was in a board meeting when I first saw the numbers that made my heart race. Brown Technologies had lost 30% of their market share in Asia, and their stock was plummeting. My father had always been proud of his personal touch approach to business, but in a digital age, that wasn't enough anymore. Clients wanted efficiency, not golf course handshakes. Another company from Brown's portfolio dropped our competitor's system for ours, my head of sales announced proudly. "That's the 5th one this quarter." The team erupted in applause, but I kept my expression neutral. They didn't know they were celebrating my father's downfall, and I intended to keep it that way. Later that evening, as I sat in my office overlooking the Singapore skyline, my phone lit up with a message from Jacob. We hadn't spoken since I left, but I wasn't surprised he was reaching out now. "Dad's losing it," he wrote. "The board is pressuring him to modernize, but he won't listen. Says he won't be bullied by some upstart company." I didn't respond, but I smiled at the irony. My father, who'd spent years bullying me into fitting his narrow view of what a daughter should be, was now being forced to change by the very person he'd dismissed. The satisfaction was sweeter than I'd imagined. The next morning brought news that sent shockwaves through our office. Brown Technologies had announced their intention to acquire promising tech startups in an aggressive expansion strategy. My father was trying to buy his way out of trouble, a classic move from his playbook. "They'll be coming for us soon," my CFO warned during our emergency meeting. "We're too big of a threat to ignore." She was right. Within weeks, we received the first overture from Brown Technologies' acquisition team. The offer was generous, far more than our company was worth on paper. My executive team was ecstatic, seeing it as validation of everything we'd built. "This is an incredible opportunity," my COO argued. "We'd have the resources to scale globally overnight." But I had been waiting for this moment for too long to give in now. "Schedule a meeting," I told them. "I want to handle this personally." My team was surprised. I usually stayed out of acquisition talks, but they didn't question my decision. They'd learned to trust my instincts, even when they didn't understand them. Little did they know, I was finally ready to reveal who I really was. That night, I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars. I thought about the day I'd walked out of my father's office, about all the nights I'd spent doubting myself, wondering if I was making a mistake. Now my mistake was worth millions, and the father who'd never believed in me was about to learn exactly what he'd lost. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jacob. "Dad's planning to fly to Singapore himself for the acquisition meeting. Says he needs to handle this one personally." Perfect, I thought, putting down my phone. It was time for a long overdue family reunion. The day of the meeting arrived with a tension that crackled through our modern office space, a stark contrast to my father's traditional mahogany-filled domain. I'd chosen our largest conference room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and stunning city views. My team sat ready, tablets in hand, professional and poised. When my father walked in, flanked by his advisors, I savored the moment before he noticed me. He looked older, more worn than I remembered. Running a failing company had taken its toll. His eyes swept the room with the arrogant confidence I knew so well, until they landed on me, sitting calmly at the head of the table. The color drained from his face. "Madeline?" "Hello, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Please, take a seat. We have a lot to discuss." His advisors exchanged confused glances as my father stood frozen in the doorway. I could see him struggling to process what he was seeing. His daughter, the one he'd dismissed so easily, now sitting in the power position. "What is this?" he demanded, his shock turning to anger. "What kind of game are you playing?" "No game," I said, gesturing to the presentation screen behind me. "Just business. Nova Tech Solutions is my company. I founded it, built it, and grew it into the market leader you're now desperate to acquire." The silence in the room was deafening. My team watched with wide eyes. This was the first time many of them were learning about my connection to Brown Technologies. My father's advisors were frantically whispering among themselves, likely realizing the implications of this revelation. "Impossible," my father sputtered. "You couldn't have... This isn't..." "What's impossible?" I asked, pulling up our company's growth charts. "That I created a solution that's revolutionizing the industry? Or that I did it without your help?" One of his advisors cleared his throat. "Miss Brown, regardless of your personal connection, we're here to discuss a serious business proposition." "Of course," I smiled. "Let's discuss how my company has captured 40% of the market share in Asia. Or perhaps you'd like to talk about how our AI-driven platform has made your entire business model obsolete." My father finally found his voice. "You did this to destroy me? Your own father?" "No," I replied, my smile fading. "I did this because you taught me that being a woman meant I couldn't run a company. So I built one instead, one that's better than yours in every way." His face reddened. "Name your price," he growled. "Everyone has one." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. That's where you're wrong, Dad. This isn't about money. It never was. This company is my legacy, the one you refused to let me build with you. I walked around the table until I stood directly in front of him. Your offer is declined. You can't do this, he said, but his voice had lost its authority. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. I already have, I replied. Meeting adjourned. As my father stormed out of the conference room, his face red with rage and humiliation, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. His advisors scrambled after him, leaving behind their untouched presentation folders, sleek black binders embossed with the Brown Technologies logo I'd grown up seeing everywhere. That was unexpected, my CFO said, breaking the stunned silence that had fallen over the room. You're Walter Brown's daughter. I turned to face my team, the people who'd believed in my vision without knowing my full story. I am, but more importantly, I'm the CEO who's going to take this company global. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. News of my identity leaked to the press, and suddenly every business publication wanted the story. Tech heiress disrupts family empire became the headline of the month. My phone was flooded with messages. Old colleagues, family friends, even my mother, all wanting to understand how the dutiful daughter had transformed into a business rival. Jacob's message was the only one I read fully. I always knew you were better at this than me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. My grandmother invited me to tea at her favorite restaurant, the same place she used to take me when I was a child. Her eyes sparkled with pride as she read the latest article about Novatech's success. Your grandfather would have loved this, she said, setting down her cup. He built that company believing innovation was more important than tradition. Your father forgot that, but you didn't. Market analysts predicted that Brown Technologies would need to undergo massive restructuring to survive. My father, they said, was being pressured to step down. The board wanted younger leadership, someone who could modernize the company before it was too late. But I no longer cared about my father's company. Novatech was expanding into Europe, and we were developing new features that would revolutionize the industry even further. My team was excited, motivated, and most importantly, valued, regardless of who they were. Late one evening, as I sat in my office reviewing expansion plans, my assistant buzzed in. Your father is here to see you. I considered turning him away but decided against it. Let him see what his daughter had built without him. He entered slowly, looking uncertain in this space that was so different from his traditional office. Madeline, he said, his voice lacking its usual authority. We need to talk. About what? I asked, not offering him a seat. Business or family? Both, he admitted. The board, they want you to come back, to lead Brown Technologies' digital transformation. I laughed, the sound echoing off the glass walls. You still don't get it, do you? I didn't build this company to prove something to you. I built it because I could, because I'm good at what I do. I don't need your approval anymore. He flinched at my words, finally understanding what his actions had cost him. Not just market share or company value, but a daughter who'd been ready to give him everything. You should go, I said quietly. I have a meeting with European investors in the morning. As he left, I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere in those streets was a young woman being told she couldn't do something because of who she was. I hoped she'd prove them wrong, too. The story of my overnight success became legend in the tech world. What the headlines didn't capture were the quiet victories that followed. Brown Technologies' stock continued to plummet as more clients switched to our platform. My father's board finally took action, forcing him into early retirement, a humiliation he couldn't handle. He retreated to his mansion, refusing to face the industry that had once worshipped him. Meanwhile, Novatech soared. Our European expansion exceeded all projections, and our development team rolled out innovations faster than competitors could keep up. The office buzzed with energy and ideas, fostering the kind of collaborative environment I'd always dreamed of creating at Brown Technologies. One morning, my grandmother came to visit our Singapore headquarters. As I showed her around, introducing her to my team and demonstrating our latest technology, she squeezed my hand. "I have something for you," she said, pulling out a worn leather journal. "Your grandfather's notes from when he first started the company." She opened it to a marked page, pointing to an underlined passage. "A true legacy isn't inherited. It's earned through vision and determination." "He wrote that the day your father joined the company," she explained. "I think he knew, even then, that innovation requires more than just birthright." The words hit home. All those years, I'd fought for a place in my father's legacy, never realizing I needed to build my own. Now, standing in my own company, surrounded by people who respected me for my abilities rather than my name, I finally understood what real success felt like. The industry that had once dismissed me as Walter Brown's daughter now knew me as Madeline Brown, the innovator who'd transformed supply chain management. I'd earned that recognition every step of the way. 6 months after my father's retirement, Novatech hosted a global technology summit in Singapore. Industry leaders from around the world gathered to discuss the future of supply chain management. I took the stage as the keynote speaker, my grandmother beaming proudly from the front row. "Innovation isn't about following traditions," I told the packed auditorium. "It's about having the courage to challenge them." The irony wasn't lost on anyone when I announced our latest breakthrough, an upgrade that would make traditional systems like Brown Technologies completely obsolete. After the summit, Jacob approached me at the reception. He looked different, humbler, more genuine. "I sold my shares in Dad's company," he confessed. "Started a small sports coaching business instead. For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy." I smiled, realizing we'd both found freedom in different ways. He'd escaped our father's expectations by choosing his own path, while I'd conquered them by exceeding them. My mother still sends occasional messages, trying to broker peace between my father and me. She doesn't understand that some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. I've made my peace with that, just as I've made peace with my journey. These days, when young entrepreneurs ask me for advice, I tell them my real secret to success. Don't let anyone else define your worth. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right. As for my father, last I heard, he spends his days in his study, surrounded by the mahogany panels that once witnessed his greatest mistake, underestimating his daughter. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we learn too late. To Grace! My mom's voice rang out over the room, a beaming smile on her face as she lifted her glass. "The one who made this magical day happen. I couldn't have done it without you." I froze in my seat, the words slamming into me like a brick wall. Applause erupted around me, the room filled with laughter and cheers as Grace, sitting just a few seats away, gave a modest little smile and nodded graciously. "My name is Anna Clark. I'm 30 years old, and up until recently, I thought I had a pretty solid relationship with my mom. We used to be close, movie nights, long talks over coffee, a real bond. But everything changed when she started dating her now husband, Mark. Slowly, I felt her pulling away, replacing me with Grace, her new stepdaughter, who was younger, prettier, and seemingly flawless in every way. This wedding, her wedding, was supposed to be my way of reconnecting with her, of proving that I still mattered. I'd spent months planning every detail, silently footing the bill for everything from the venue to the flowers. But it was all a secret, at her insistence, to keep the magic alive. And now, here I was, invisible, as she gave all the credit to someone who barely lifted a finger. The months leading up to the wedding had been a whirlwind of work, stress, and quiet sacrifices. Mom hadn't been involved in the planning at all. That was her decision. "Anna, I don't want to get wrapped up in the stress of it all," she'd said early on. "You're so much better at this kind of thing. Just surprise me, okay? I know you'll make it perfect." Her trust, though flattering, felt strange. She never asked me about the progress, no questions about the flowers, the venue, or even the dress code. It left me confused, but I told myself she was just excited to enjoy the surprise on her big day. I worked tirelessly, managing every detail, from securing the venue to designing the seating chart. I poured my heart into it, convincing myself that this would bring us closer again. What I didn't know, what I only realized too late, was that Grace had been telling Mom a different story. Behind the scenes, Grace had been claiming credit for the entire wedding planning process. I didn't understand why Mom never brought up the preparations to me, why she never seemed curious or concerned about how things were going. Now looking back, the pieces fit. Grace had made sure Mom believed she was the one making it all happen. I didn't see it then, caught up in the work and my hope for the perfect day. I thought Mom's distance was just her way of letting me take the reins. I never imagined it was because she thought someone else was holding them. I remembered a strange conversation I had overheard a few weeks before the wedding. Mom and Grace were sitting in the living room while I was in the kitchen, jotting down notes for the guest list. Their voices carried just loud enough for me to catch snippets. "Oh, Grace, you've been such a lifesaver with all this wedding planning," Mom said, her voice warm and appreciative. "I honestly don't know how I'd have managed without you." Grace laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that grated once you realized how fake it was. "Oh, it's nothing really," she said. "I just want your day to be perfect. You deserve it." My pen froze mid-note, the words making my stomach twist. What was Mom talking about? Grace hadn't been involved in the wedding at all, at least not that I'd seen. But before I could think too much about it, Mom's voice softened further. "I'm so lucky to have a stepdaughter like you," she said. "You're such a natural at this. I thought that Anna was handling it, but you're probably much better than her at it, of course." My throat tightened as I stood there, the conversation echoing in my mind. I wanted to walk in and ask what they were talking about, but I stopped myself. Maybe Mom was just being polite, or maybe Grace was helping in some small way I wasn't aware of. I told myself it didn't matter. But now, sitting here at the reception, her words made all too much sense. Grace had planted those seeds, and Mom had swallowed the narrative whole. The weeks leading up to the wedding were grueling. Every spare moment was consumed by spreadsheets, emails, and endless phone calls. I worked late into the night most days, juggling my regular job with the ever-growing list of wedding tasks. My desk became a chaotic mess of vendor contracts, swatches of fabric for the table linens, and color-coded seating charts. There was the day the florist called to tell me the flowers Mom wanted weren't in season, and I had to scour local suppliers to find a replacement. Then there was the venue mix-up, when the hall booked for the reception accidentally double-scheduled us with a corporate event. I spent hours on the phone smoothing things over, eventually securing the perfect space, though it cost more than I'd budgeted. I coordinated the catering, choosing a menu I knew Mom would love, and even paid extra for a tasting session to make sure it was just right. I handpicked the decorations, spent hours folding and tying ribbons for the chairs, and painstakingly designed the invitations myself to save money. All of this was done in secret, just as Mom had asked. "I want it to be a surprise," she'd said. But the surprise came at a cost. Late nights, skipped meals, and a painful dent in my savings. I had put my whole heart into making it perfect for her, telling myself it was worth it to see her smile on the big day. And now, sitting at the reception, it was clear I'd been invisible the whole time. The sound of a fork tapping against a glass silenced the chatter in the reception hall. I looked up to see Mom standing at the head table, a radiant smile lighting up her face as she held her glass aloft. The room quieted in anticipation. "I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here today," she began, her voice warm and filled with emotion. "This day has been a dream come true for me, and I'm so grateful to share it with all of you." Her eyes scanned the room, briefly meeting mine, before moving on. Planning a wedding is no small task, and I have to admit I wasn't involved in much of it. But thankfully, I had someone who stepped in and made this day as perfect as it is. My heart swelled for just a moment, foolishly hoping she meant me. "Grace," Mom continued, her voice brimming with pride, "you've been my rock through this whole process. You've been there every step of the way, making sure every detail was perfect. I couldn't have done this without you." The room erupted into applause, heads turning toward Grace, who gave a bashful smile and waved lightly, like the gracious heroine in some story only she seemed to know. "I'm so lucky to have you as my stepdaughter," Mom said, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. "You've made this day magical, and I'll never forget everything you've done for me." The applause grew louder, and tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as the weight of her words settled in. Not one mention of me, not even a nod in my direction. I sat frozen in my seat, forcing a smile as my chest tightened painfully. Grace beamed under the attention, her eyes flickering to mine for the briefest moment, a subtle smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. I sat there, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my heart pounding in my chest as the applause for Grace roared around the room. My cheeks burned, and I swallowed hard, willing the tears to stay hidden. This wasn't the time, this wasn't the place. Looking at Mom, glowing with happiness, and Grace, soaking up the admiration, I felt a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. But I also knew that saying anything now would only make things worse. This was her day, her wedding. No matter how much it hurt, I couldn't bring myself to ruin it. I forced a smile and joined in the polite clapping, though it felt like my hands weighed a ton. I kept my gaze down and my face neutral, determined not to let anyone see how much I was unraveling inside. I told myself I'd deal with it later, process it, confront it if I had to. But not now. Not here. For the rest of the evening, I stayed quiet, blending into the background as much as possible, waiting for the night to finally end. A week after the wedding, when Mom returned from her honeymoon, I decided I couldn't hold it in any longer. The betrayal had been simmering in my chest, growing heavier with each passing day. I went over to her house and found her unpacking suitcases in the living room, her face still glowing from the vacation. "Mom," I started, my voice sharper than I intended. "We need to talk." She looked up, her smile faltering at my tone. "What is it, Anna? You don't look happy to see me." I crossed my arms, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "What the heck was that? At the wedding? I was the one who did everything for you, and you stood up there and gave all the credit to Grace. She didn't do a single thing." Mom's face hardened, the warmth in her eyes vanishing. "Anna," she said, her voice icy, "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this jealousy of Grace is unbecoming. She worked so hard to make that day special for me. She was the one who actually cared about me." My jaw dropped, my stomach twisting into knots. "Jealousy? Mom, I'm not jealous. Grace lied to you. She didn't plan anything. I did. Every flower arrangement, every table, every vendor, I was the one who made it all happen." Mom let out a dismissive laugh, shaking her head. "Stop it, Anna. I asked you to handle the planning, but you clearly didn't care enough to follow through. Grace stepped in because she knew how important this day was to me. She's the one who made it perfect, not you." I stared at her, disbelief flooding through me. "She lied to you, Mom. She didn't do anything. She just took credit for all my work, and you believed her without even asking me about it?" She crossed her arms, her expression unyielding. "Grace wouldn't lie to me, Anna. You're just upset because she outshone you, and frankly, that's on you." Her words hit me like a slap, and I felt the tears rising despite my best efforts to stay composed. "You're wrong," I said, my voice trembling. "And one day, you'll see that." But she turned away, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "I think you should leave, Anna. I won't stand here and listen to you badmouth Grace." I walked out, my chest aching, the door slamming behind me. Her blind loyalty to Grace stung more than anything I could have imagined. She had chosen Grace's lie over my truth, and I didn't know how, or if I could ever fix that. The next day I couldn't let it go. The anger and betrayal bubbling inside me pushed me to do what I'd been avoiding. I went to Grace's apartment. When she opened the door, her face lit up with that saccharine smile she always wore, as if she hadn't turned my life upside down. "Anna," she chirped, leaning casually against the doorframe. "What a surprise. What brings you here?" I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Sure, come on in," she said with a cheerful tone, stepping aside. I walked past her into the pristine living room, the scent of her overly sweet perfume lingering in the air. I turned to face her, not bothering with pleasantries. "What the heck, Grace? Why did you tell my mom that you planned her wedding?" Her smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just irritation. "What are you talking about?" she said, feigning confusion. "Don't play dumb," I snapped, my voice rising. "You told her you planned the wedding. You let her believe you did everything when it was all me. Do you have any idea how hard I worked? How much I sacrificed to make it perfect?" Grace laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Anna, I never told her anything like that. She just assumed I was helping. I didn't think it was a big deal, so I didn't correct her." I glared at her, my blood boiling. "Didn't correct her? You sat there at the reception and soaked up all the credit. You let her believe it was you while she completely ignored me." She crossed her arms, her smile turning smug. "Look, it's not my fault she believes in me more than you. Maybe if you'd been a little more open about what you were doing, this wouldn't have happened." Her words hit like a slap, and I took a step closer, my voice trembling with fury. "You're unbelievable. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you didn't care. All you wanted was the spotlight." Grace shrugged, her expression cool and detached. "If it means that much to you, talk to her. It's not my problem if she thinks I'm better at these things than you are." I stared at her, disbelief and disgust flooding through me. "You're pathetic, Grace," I said, my voice low. "And one way or another, the truth is going to come out. Enjoy the spotlight while you can." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved with a mix of anger and resolve. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. Grace wasn't going to get away with this. The day of Grace's birthday arrived, and I sat at home stewing, knowing full well I hadn't been invited. I'd heard from my brother that it was going to be a big celebration. Grace's friends, her boyfriend Liam, and even my mom and the rest of the family would be there. The thought of them all laughing and celebrating while Grace basked in the attention made my blood boil. I stared at the folder on the table in front of me, packed with receipts, email chains, and text messages. Every piece of evidence proving that I had been the one to plan and pay for Mom's wedding. Grace's lies had stolen my effort, my recognition, and my relationship with Mom. And I'd had enough. I grabbed the folder, threw on a coat, and headed out the door. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. Before I showed up, the room was buzzing with admiration for Grace. Laughter echoed through the space as her friends and family circled her, their voices overlapping with compliments. "You really outdid yourself with that wedding, Grace," one of her friends gushed, holding a glass of champagne. "Everything was so elegant. It looked like something out of a magazine." Another chimed in, "The floral arrangements were breathtaking. You have such an eye for detail." Even Mom couldn't hold back her adoration. "I don't know how you managed it all," she said, beaming at Grace. "You made it perfect, just like I knew you would." Grace basked in the attention, smiling sweetly and nodding modestly, her eyes glinting with satisfaction as she soaked up the praise for work she hadn't done. When I arrived at Grace's apartment, the party was in full swing. Laughter spilled out into the hallway as I stood at the door, taking one last deep breath before knocking. The noise quieted, and a moment later Grace opened the door. Her smile froze when she saw me. "Anna," she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "Crashing the party," I said evenly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The room fell silent as I walked in, all eyes turning toward me. Mom was sitting on the couch, a drink in hand, while Grace's boyfriend Liam stood near the cake, looking confused. "Everyone?" I began, my voice loud and steady. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something I need to say." Grace closed the door and turned to me, her face pale. "Anna, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I cut her off, my gaze sweeping the room. "For weeks now, I've been watching someone else take credit for everything I did to plan my mom's wedding. And I think it's time everyone knows the truth." A murmur went through the crowd as I opened the folder and pulled out the first stack of receipts. "I was the one who booked the venue," I said, holding up the contract with my name on it. "I hired the caterers, chose the menu, and paid for every single dish served that night." I moved to the next pile. "I picked out the flowers, organized the centerpieces, and coordinated the delivery times. Here's the invoice and the email chain confirming it." My voice grew stronger as I continued, laying out the text messages, spreadsheets, and more. Everything, the invitations, the decorations, the seating arrangements, was done by me, not Grace. The room was dead silent now, the weight of my words settling over everyone. Mom's face was frozen in shock, and Grace stood stiffly near the door, her jaw clenched. "Anna," Mom finally said, her voice wavering, "what are you talking about? Grace told me." "Grace lied," I said, cutting her off as I turned to face Grace. "Go on, Grace. Tell everyone how you let her believe you did all the work. Tell them how you stood there at the reception and took credit for things you had nothing to do with." Grace's lips parted, but no words came out. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. "It's not like that," she stammered, her voice shaky. I didn't lie, I didn't correct her because it wasn't a big deal." "Not a big deal," I said, my voice rising. "You let me work myself to exhaustion while you stood there and soaked up the praise. You didn't care about what that would do to me, or to Mom." Liam stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. "Grace," he said slowly, "is this true? Did you lie about planning the wedding?" Grace turned to him, her eyes wide. "Liam, I—" "Don't," he said, holding up a hand. "Just tell me the truth." She looked around the room, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Fine," she said finally, her voice bitter. "Yes, okay? I didn't plan the wedding. Anna did, but it's not like it matters. It was just one day." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Liam's face hardened, and he took a step back from her. "It matters to me," he said coldly. "If you can lie about something like this, what else are you lying about?" He shook his head, his voice filled with disbelief. "I can't do this anymore, Grace. We're done." Grace's mouth fell open, but no words came out. The color drained from her face as she watched Liam grab his coat and leave. I turned to Mom, who was sitting frozen, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. "I tried to tell you," I said softly. "I did everything for you, and you wouldn't even listen to me." "Anna," she said, her voice breaking, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I should have asked, I should have." "It's too late for that," I said, my tone firm but not unkind. "I just needed you to know the truth, and now you do." With that, I gathered my things and walked out, leaving the party in stunned silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. A couple of days later, the phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced at the screen, surprised to see Grace's father's name. Mark wasn't the type to call. He was always quiet, keeping to himself at family gatherings. Hesitating for a moment, I answered. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Anna," his deep voice came through, slow and deliberate. "It's Mark. I hope I'm not bothering you." "No, it's fine," I replied, unsure of where this was going. "What's on your mind?" There was a pause, the kind that felt heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he sighed. "I just wanted to Apologize, he said, his voice thick with shame. For what happened, for what Grace did. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice calm. You don't have to apologize for her, Mark. It wasn't your fault. I know, he said quickly. But still, I feel responsible. I raised her better than that, or at least I thought I did. He paused again, struggling to find the right words. At the party, when I found out what she did, taking credit for all your work, I was ashamed, Anna. Terribly ashamed. You didn't deserve that. I swallowed hard, his sincerity catching me off guard. Thank you for saying that, I said softly. It means a lot. She's paying the price now, Mark continued, his tone somber. I think she's starting to understand the damage she's done. But that doesn't fix what you went through. If there's anything I can do to make it right, anything at all, just say the word. I exhaled, the weight of his words settling over me. I appreciate that, Mark, I said after a moment. I really do. But I think the best thing you can do is talk to Grace. Help her see why this wasn't okay. I will, he said firmly. I promise, Anna. And again, I'm sorry. For all of it. Thank you, I said, my voice steady but filled with gratitude. That means more than you know. In the weeks following Grace's birthday, things shifted. Mom reached out several times, apologizing profusely for not believing me, and for the way she had dismissed my efforts. Her words were filled with regret, and though I accepted her apology, I made it clear that rebuilding trust would take time. Grace, on the other hand, had become a shadow of her former self. The admiration she had once basked in was gone, replaced by awkward silence and judgmental stares from friends and family who now saw her for who she truly was. Liam never came back, and from what I heard, Grace hadn't taken the breakup well. As for me, I felt lighter. For so long I had sought validation from people who didn't value me, but now I realized I didn't need their approval to feel worthy. I channeled my energy into myself, picking up hobbies I'd neglected, reconnecting with friends, and setting boundaries that protected my peace. Mom and I eventually began to repair our relationship, but it was different now. I no longer bent over backward to prove myself, and she seemed to genuinely respect the space I needed. The distance allowed us to rebuild something healthier, something that wasn't built on my sacrifices. As for Grace, she faded from the center of attention, and I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for her. But only a little. Sometimes, the truth had a way of setting things right. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally move forward.